Hello, technology enthusiasts, and welcome to another edition of Scaling Your Business with Technology. And as always, the reason we do this is because technology projects are not always easy, but they should be straightforward. So my goal is to help you simplify technology and ultimately accelerate technology adoption so you can help scale your businesses. And today we're talking about ChatGPT and specifically how you use ChatGPT at work in corporations and enterprises, because people are using it. It's one of those things where you can't stop. Everyone's out there using it. And this actually came from a question, actually, a number of questions I've had over the last few weeks. So I figured I'd address it. And that question was, how should we use ChatGPT at work? So this was a specific question I was getting over and over again, different variations on it. So I wanted to tackle this, break this down. Actually, what is ChatGPT good for? I'm going to cover that first. Then we're going to go into what you need to watch for when using ChatGPT at work. And then we're going to wrap up on a quick checklist for anyone who's looking for advice, guidance on how to implement or share the use of ChatGPT at their business, and what guidelines to give your staff and people using it. I've got a quick checklist at the end for you. As always, taking comments and questions in the live stream here. So feel free to drop in your comments and I'll address those. Had a few come in already, which is awesome. And I'll make sure I cover those, particularly around the data accuracy and bias. So we're going to talk about that as well. So just checking everything's working. Okay, yep, we're good to go. So let's dive into it. At the end of the day, ChatGPT is inevitable. It's one of those things where you can't uninvent technology, and the adoption of ChatGPT has just been, quite frankly, is absolutely amazing. So to the point where people are using it all the time and often, but then there's also some people who are nervous of it, especially people in IT departments. They're worried about how it's being used in businesses, and they're being asked for guidelines. Should we ban ChatGPT in our company? If we do use it, how do we use it in the right way? So let's start with what ChatGPT and other AI tools are good for. There's many AI tools. I want to zoom in on ChatGPT, but this does actually apply to many AI tools. So let's zoom into what it's good for. So drafting content, emails, communications, job descriptions, anything that involves creative writing. I use ChatGPT and I've worked with my clients on using it to brainstorm ideas around how do I craft this email in a more persuasive manner, or how do I add some friendlier tone to my emails, or maybe a communication if I'm announcing a new team member to a project or onboarding a new member of staff to my team. I asked ChatGPT to draft up that communication in an energetic style, or in a way that uses different tone to help, as long as you prompt it in the right way, give it tone to make sure you put your message across well. Job descriptions as well, where you don't want to have to sit down and think about that. You want somewhere to start. You can say, give me a job description for an AI developer, or someone in the DevOps space, maybe a project team, or maybe on your HR side. You can ask it to prompt those job descriptions. Again, it gives you a good basis to work with. And that's what I really, really like ChatGPT for. It just starts your thinking. And by the way, pro tip, I also used to think this is going to take away my critical thinking. But what I found it does, it actually helps my critical thinking, because it starts me off especially when you have writer's block. It's like, where do I start? And ChatGPT is really good at saying, okay, here's a foundation, and it actually starts you thinking more. And that's what I love about this tool. So let's move on to the next, what it's good for, which is research, summarizing points into bullet points. So if you have a long piece of text, maybe you found a really good article, or maybe a friend has sent you something to read, this is a really good way to summarize it. So, hey, ChatGPT, please summarize this into bullet points or sections, or pull out the 3 topics from this article. And I found that really useful as well. Again, it does save time by me not having to read through the article end to end. But what I find is I still need to read the article, but it very quickly pulls out some key points for me, which I can then validate and say, yep, those are the 3 key points. And then I build on it. And that's an important point I'm going to come on to next. So again, it's really good at doing the research. So find me some information on a particular topic around a an AI tool, perhaps, or maybe different project delivery methodologies, or how to scale businesses, and then summarizing that into key points. Then we move on to the third point, which is around creating and also checking code. So this is developer code. So this is, again, it's not taking the tools, the skills away from developers, but it's enhancing their skills. It's building on it. So you can actually have ChatGPT create code for you in SQL, Excel macros, and Python, which I've listed there. Many other languages out there, computer programming languages and developer languages. It's very good at also reviewing code. So if you put it in there, it can check for errors, flow, functions, make sure you've got the right terms and formats and functions in there as well. Again, it doesn't take away the source of you thinking as a developer to say, what code do I need to write? How do I need to make sure it's accurate? It's almost like a partner, developer partner, to help you write better code. Another great use case is hiring questions to ask at interviews. So again, I've used this many times as well, as in when I'm interviewing a role for a particular helping a business scale. Maybe it's in marketing or sales, or maybe it's technology, or maybe it's operations. I have a good idea of what I want out of the role, but I'll just put into ChatGPT to say, as a type of company that I'm hiring for, what questions would I ask a candidate around this role that I'm looking to hire? And it'll then, ChatGPT then suggests some questions to ask. Again, a good grounding, a good baseline foundation for me to take and then use to then build on my questions. It helps me think of other questions that I hadn't thought of before. Also, then I think of more questions as a result of what ChatGPT responds with. So again, it's good for that initial creative thinking. Now, another area, which I think, again, this is where it starts to get into the quality and accuracy, but I do want to highlight this, is around checking, for example, checklists for contract reviews. So again, this is a good sense check where, what would I look for when reviewing a technical contract? What are the key points to look out for? And you can be specific around the technology or the size of company or even the vendor, and say, what should I look for in a cloud technology contract, or an automation contract, or a services provider contract? Or maybe it's the clauses in an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. What are the key clauses I should look for? Again, not suggesting that you replace your legal department on any of these contract reviews, or your supply chain department, but it gives you that good sense check, because the legal and supply chain have their place and value in reviewing contracts. But you also need to know what's in that contract, especially if you're going to be working with vendors, technology vendors, especially for a long time. So this is a really good way to say, okay, what should I look for in a contract review? And then I can use that to make sure I ask the vendor the right questions when we're interviewing them or going through a selection and evaluation process. And then we're going to dive a bit deeper into this last use case on what it's good for. So summarizing financial statements into a presentation. So some of you are probably putting up some red flags now around financial information and statements, and you'd be right. And I want to cover that in a second. But what I want to suggest is that you can use your internal information. If you sanitize it in the right way and don't share any private information or confidential information, you can use it to then summarize that information into a presentation format, into bullets, into key messages that you need to share and maybe present to management or your team, or at a town hall, for example. So similar to that second bullet point around the research, it's very good at taking text and summarizing it into key points. And you can also ask ChatGPT to build on that as well. The number of times I've put in some information, long text around some of the some training material I've written, or some of the communication I want to put out there, but I want to summarize it into key points to put into a presentation. It does that really, really quickly. So that's what it's good for. So again, see it as a partner, almost like a computer buddy, to help you with your creative thinking, to get your ideas started, and then you build on it. And that's why we want to make sure now we move into the next key thing around, this is what it's good for, but now what do you need to watch for? So what do you need to watch for when using ChatGPT? And there are a number of things, because again, bear in mind that ChatGPT is a public open AI, which means all your data is ultimately is shared with others. So that's one of the key things I want to cover, but there are also some others. So the first thing is, know that your data is shared. There are some specific options. You can opt out of sharing data with ChatGPT, but it's not easy to find. And I will put a guidance on that in the notes. But what you need to do is make sure, if you're concerned about your data being shared, is go into the settings on ChatGPT and then opt out of the use of this data for training. Because if it's not, your data, assume your data will be shared. Personally, even if I am opting out of that, using the data for training, I'm going to assume my data is shared anyway, because again, it's a free tool that you're using. It's called OpenAI. I know some of the code is closed down, but again, just assume that anything shared out on the internet or in the applications could be accessed by anyone. So just be really, really careful about the data you share on ChatGPT. An easy way around that is just to take out the key details. So if you're sharing a financial statement, or some paragraph about your company, just take out the company name, just take out any key details. And if you need to have the financials in there to give you context, just replace the financials with a different number. So you can't trace it back to your own company. So that's the first one, is just know that it is shared, and then the privacy around data is something to watch for. Secondly is accuracy. So at the end of the day, it's the internet. The ChatGPT is basing its source on the internet data around 2021 and earlier. So it's not up to date. It doesn't have up to date as of 2023. And again, it's internet data. So there's not validation on some of that internet data out there. So you have to be aware of the accuracy. And that's where I really like using it, as I said before, for content creation, thinking, and then I take that and build on it. I'm not asking it for specific answers, because I would have to validate that, and it often gets difficult to know what is the source of truth. It doesn't reference where it's pulling this information from, other than the internet. So again, just be aware of, there are maybe some question around the accuracy. Most of the time it's good, but there could be some questions there. Thirdly, we're going to talk about, because it's based on internet but data, there's also some bias in there. I personally haven't seen that much in any of my responses I've got back from ChatGPT. But again, just be aware that the response back is based on the internet. So it's based on people's views and opinions. As a result, you have to apply your own judgment, context, and interpretation to make sure that you're not applying a bias to an answer, a point of view. And most of the time, you're not going to come across this. But if in a business environment, you're not going to come across this. But if you start to get into, say, for example, some HR policies, if you're looking to write some guidelines for how to work with staff, just be aware of where it's pulling this information from, which is the internet. So you will need to get a consult from your legal and HR departments and the expert to make sure it's accurate and relevant to your specific company need. Then fourthly, again, interpretation. So bear in mind, AI is learning. That's why ChatGPT has exploded so much. And the nature of ChatGPT means it learns from the prompts. It learns from people using it and ultimately gets better. But as a result, its own interpretation is based on what it's learned so far. So it's getting better and better. But where it doesn't have the information, or maybe there's missing data on the internet, or it can't find it quickly or can't find what it's looking for, it will fill the gaps. And that's the beauty of AI. It fills gaps in knowledge and applies interpretation. But as a result of that, when it's filling gaps, that's where you need to make sure that those gaps are filled correctly. So, for example, if you're asking for questions around an interview, you just want to make sure those questions are correct for that role, because you might have asked about a role for maybe a technical support analyst or maybe a specific technology, and it's actually referred to a different technology. So again, you would see this when you're reading through the responses, but just bear that in mind, that sometimes ChatGPT will fill in the gaps. So you can't take it as the source of truth. It's something to work with, not the final answer. And then lastly, and things to watch for, is the context, the tone. ChatGPT is very generic. It's deliberately coming back with an artificial language. So sometimes the tone is a little bit off. It's a little bit too, when I've asked for friendly and relaxed tone, it's a bit too relaxed, a bit too friendly. I've asked for fun communications, and it's put in some jokes which would just didn't really land. So it's funny to read the responses, but it's not something you'd use. So again, just watch for the context and the tone. And the short answer here is that do not copy and paste ChatGPT into your work. At the end of the day, you need to read through it, make sure it's good, make sure the tone and the context is applied in the right way. Again, you're applying this to your specific role. It's not replacing your role. So don't replace your role with the ChatGPT responses. Make sure you apply your own interpretation and tone to it. So we covered what it's good for, and we covered what to watch for with using ChatGPT. And now we're going to round out on a quick checklist to show how would you use ChatGPT in the business environment. So I want to leave you with something you can take away and use with your own teams. So let's run through this checklist. So the ChatGPT business checklist starts with the first one, which is know that it's shared data. So again, these are guidelines you can give to your staff and your teams when they're using ChatGPT. Just let your teams know that this is shared data. So don't post anything that's private or confidential. If you do need to use that data to get a better answer, just change the data. Make sure it can't ever be traced back to your own company and your own job or even you, because that data is shared on the internet. Give examples of how to use it. So with the staff using ChatGPT and your teams using ChatGPT, give them some examples like the first section I gave there around what it's good for. So give them some examples around summarizing text or doing research, or maybe doing some checklists, or like I said, the job descriptions, or even the job questions for asking interviews, helping with communications, emails. Again, give some examples around people using it for creative writing, for promoting your thinking, how to work with it. And again, that guides your team in terms of how to use ChatGPT. And by the way, using any technology always comes back with know why you're using it. It's a great tool, but it's also a shiny object. You don't want to spend hours just playing around with ChatGPT, seeing what it can do. Always go in with intent. Understand what you're using ChatGPT. Otherwise, you'll go down a bit of a rabbit hole in terms of how it can be used, because quite frankly, it will go on and on and on. And it is amazing in terms of how it works. But to use your time effectively, you need to have that single specific purpose or intent for what you need out of that specific question you're asking it. The third guideline would be build on the responses. Don't copy and paste. As I mentioned before, the tone, the bias, the interpretation, the accuracy, you need to guide your staff and your teams to take the response and then use it to make your job better. Use it to save time by creating that initial text, but don't copy and paste it. That's not applying the critical thinking. That's not applying value. You as a role, you as a person and your team, you need to use this as a tool to make something better. It's not going to do your job for you. And quite frankly, if you're using it to do your job for you, then someone's going to see that and someone's going to spot it. So make sure you give the guidance to say, build on the responses. Fourth, just make sure you highlight that this data is the internet. I know most people know this, but it's always worth reminding that the answers they're getting back is based on internet data, sub 2021 and below, and earlier than that. So again, it's not wholly up to date. If you're asking very specific questions around latest events in the media or news, it's not going to have that. So, which also applies to policies, procedures, when you're asking it for specifics around something that might need more around cybersecurity, for example. The industry is changing very quickly. So just, again, let them know that it's internet data, and they need to be aware that that data is based on 2021 and earlier. The next, watch for bias and inaccuracy. So when they're getting back the responses, guide your teams to make sure they check to make sure it's accurate. And that might be you have to sense check that and fact check it. And also make sure there's no bias in there. Again, this is you providing the information, not the AI. So watch for that bias, watch for leaning views or opinions, which ultimately don't make sense in your business environment. So just remind your staff to watch for that bias and inaccuracy. Quick warning around copyright material as well. I've not seen this come up as a problem, but it is something to be aware of, and please warn your teams around this. As we know, it's ChatGPT is pulling information from the internet, of which some of it may be copyrighted. If you're taking the ChatGPT information and then building on it and applying your interpretation, that it shouldn't be a problem, because you're rebuilding the content into your own voice. But if you're literally taking some elements or facts or figures or maybe some information, just be aware that it could be copyrighted, especially applying it in the business environment, that we may have to run up against or check it from a copyright point of view. Again, the easiest way to get around this is just to apply your own interpretation and then just build on it from there. And this is what leads me to my second last point, which is this is my favorite one. If there's any of these points that we want to emphasize the most, it's this one: be clear on who's accountable, because the person using ChatGPT is accountable, not the AI. You can't blame ChatGPT for a mistake or an error, because at the end of the day, it's a tool. You're using that tool, therefore you're accountable. Again, very easy to use, if it's very easy to work around, if you make sure you take that information, apply your own interpretation, and then work with it to ultimately give a better result. Use it as your creative writing partner to save you time. And then lastly, on the checklist is the fact check the results. Have someone review it, make sure it's all good. Make sure that you ultimately, if you're not sure about the accuracy, then get someone else to read it through for you. If you are getting into some specific legal contract terms, or maybe some HR conditions, or maybe you're representing the company with the information, again, just check that, as you would do with any information. Just check that with the relevant expert in your company, and let people know that you've used ChatGPT to build this. Again, you're showing your skill by using AI tools, and show that you've used it and you've applied it, and here's what you've built on, and how you've actually made your response better, your work better by using ChatGPT. So that's the checklist for how to use ChatGPT in the business. We covered lots of topics around what it's good for, what to watch for, and I wanted to leave you with this checklist to make sure that you had the right information and to share with your teams. And again, use ChatGPT for this. Put this into ChatGPT, build out, say, hey, what would I use for my business to make sure we use ChatGPT in the right way? And that's a great way to use the tool, again, to build on it and ultimately save you time, which is what AI is all about. So thank you again for joining me. It's always great to have you folks join me for these calls, share the information, and use this with you'll be able to use this with your teams. We are a special group of technology project enthusiasts, so I'm here cheering you on. And as we continue to push, grow, and scale your companies and make a difference in technology, I'm right there behind you. And I'll see you in the next episode.